If the Trump in your mind is the like scary fire-breathing guy from rallies, and you're just like a 18, 17, 22-year-old, whatever guy who's like not that into politics, listen to these podcasts because you like UFC, and it's like, I'm not sure if I'm in with all the like wild Trump stuff. And then you hear like, oh, he's just a guy who talks about UFC and golf. He's not that scary. The Democrats say that he's terrifying, but like, I don't know, he seems chill and he talks about his brother. I think that really like makes him a little fuzzier and softer and creates maybe a little bit of a permission structure.
I'm Jon Favreau. Welcome to Offline. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Max Fisher.
And believe it or not, this podcast is not part of a Russian influence operation to infiltrate the manosphere with anti-American propaganda
but
that
here,
we know of.
But here's my checking account number in case anybody wants to make a deposit.
All right, we'll get into all of this soon, plus lots more news to cover. So we're going to, again, skip the guest to get straight to the headlines. This week, a new federal indictment alleges that the Russian government has been funding right-wing internet personalities. The Brazilian Supreme Court blocks access to the social network formerly known as Twitter, and Haley Welch.
Doesn't matter because that's not what anybody calls her.
And Haley Welch, better known as the Hawk Tuah girl, follows the path of every red-blooded American looking to monetize and extend their 15 minutes of fame.
Oh boy, does she.
She's starting a podcast.
Oh yeah. Good for her. We need more podcasts.
We need more
I'm
podcasters.
always saying the podcast economy is too sparse.
Welcome to the family, Haley Welch. But first, Donald Trump has embarked on a tour of the manosphere. Over the last couple of weeks, the Republican nominee for president has skipped interviews with traditional outlets in favor of conversations with right-wing aligned YouTubers, streamers, and podcasters. Among them, an interview with YouTuber turned boxer Jake Paul, a kick stream with Aiden Ross, in which the streamer gifted Trump a Tesla Cybertruck. Hard to find something more ugly.
Which you actually give me after every podcast.
I do, yeah.
Which is really nice. But they're really piling up at home.
In the parking garage. He also had an appearance on This Past Weekend with Theo in which Trump had a surprising number of questions about cocaine. And most recently, an interview with AI researcher turned pseudo-intellectual Lex Friedman. Lots of different podcasts, lots of different conversations, but notably, all of these creators share one thing in common. Their audience is overwhelmingly young and male, revealing a concerted effort by the Trump campaign to target Gen Z men. Just as a flavor of what this was like, here's Trump with Theo Von.
Is cocaine a stronger
Oh, yeah.
up?
Yeah. Cocaine
So,
will make
you're way up with cocaine more than anything else you can think of.
Cocaine will turn you into a damn owl, homie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You'll be out on your own porch, you know, and you'll be your own street lamp. You're freaking.
And is that a good feeling? Well,
No,
it's
horrible.
a miserable feeling.
But you do it anyway, just like the guy you're saying with the scotch.
This really stepped on our topics for this week. Does cocaine make you an owl? John, what do you say?
So Max and I were texting about this last night. Like, he seems in this clip, Donald Trump, like he is a man from the distant past, an old man from the distant past who just showed up in 2024. Like, so cocaine, that makes you feel that's an up? Like you are
the white powder?
You are a 78-year-old.
Asking about jazz cigarettes.
You're just learning about cocaine?
And the beboppers. It is so weird. I was talking to Emma about this. It is so strange to hear him having just a normal conversation where there's like an exchange and a back and forth, and he's asking questions and he's saying, that's interesting. Like the probably 100 cumulative hours of Donald Trump I have consumed in my lifetime, every second of which I regret. I've never heard him have a normal conversation, and it's weird. It's like watching a dog walk on its hind legs.
It's a different Trump.
Yes.
Which I think is part of the strategy.
I
here,
agree.
Which we'll get
Yes,
into.
it is. Yes.
But so for our audience who may not be familiar with the worlds of Theo Von and Jake Paul, how would you describe these personalities, why they're all connected, and why they have such a big audience?
What do you think is the percentage overlap between Offline and Theo Von listeners?
I mean,
more than 1%.
Yeah, well, let us know. Let us know
yeah.
if you've...
Yeah, write in.
Yeah, write in. Let us know if you've been listening to Theo Von.
So I would say that this circle of podcasters, which is huge, is like news media for young men who don't want to consume news media.
Yes.
It's like anti-woke, but like not in a Ben Shapiro super political sense or in a red pill sense. It's more just kind of like a man cave for the guys who want a safe space with the boys and like want to chat about UFC and listen to stand-up comedians who have the same joke, which is you're not allowed to make jokes anymore. It's probably all people who are like have lurker Twitter account, like they're online, they're kind of online, like they're on spend a lot of time on YouTube and on Reddit, and the shows are like relaxed and funny, and there's trolling, but it's not outrage bait, and they're like openly kind of dumb, like kind of proudly dumb. They all go on each other's shows. Like a bunch of them live in Austin. And there's like the kind of like Joe Rogan extended universe. And I think that it just like, it's about providing a sense of social connection for
it's like a
young
community.
men. It's a community, exactly.
Politics isn't their focus. Usually comedy, sports,
Right.
MMA, UFC, gaming. And when they do talk politics, it's usually not in an explicitly partisan way, though you can tell that they are MAGA curious or at least, conservative coded on many issues.
They think the wokes have gone too far and the feminists have gone too far.
But it's to understand it, it's not, you're right, it's not like that's their soapbox all the time. I mean, it depends on who it is. That's not their soapbox all the time. Their focus is like, we're going to talk about other shit. And then if something happens in the news that seems like an opportunity to yell about the wokes, we can do that.
And they love Elon Musk, and they love, the tech companies and Teslas. And I think it's more just like a lifestyle brand that is like vaguely conservative coded more than it is explicitly politically conservative.
But I bet if you asked a lot of the viewers of these programs,
they would say it's heterodox, and they don't take sides, and that's what's interesting about it.
They're actually not registered. They're independent.
Yes.
And they listen they listen to all sides, and they don't really get into politics. That's what they would say.
Yes.
Have you had a chance to sit down and watch any of these Trump interviews?
So I did listen to half of the Theo Von podcast
yesterday. Good, because I listened to the Lex Friedman one. So
well, tell me about the Lex Friedman and all, because we just heard Theo Von.
I mean,
it's a weird show. It's a weird show.
We're going to talk about like whether this is a good strategy from Trump, but I can see why he fits with these programs in some ways. It is a good format, as all podcasts are, for people who can't shut up like Donald Trump, right? So he just goes on and on and on. It's like the Lex Friedman one was like an hour and a half. I had it on 1.75.
Sure.
To get through it.
I'm laughing because I think we went a half hour over talking about Fight Club a few days ago. So it's like, I don't have so much ground to criticize as a podcaster who loves to talk about the stuff I love to talk about. But it's different for me because I'm right.
You're right. Yeah, right. Softball questions.
Yes, very.
Right, they're all softball to
It's
Trump.
not a journalistic interview.
And you could tell a couple times Lex Friedman's like, some people who like you, they don't like the whole insurrection, stealing the election thing. Like, they don't like that as much. And Trump's like, Trump will not.
He's not going to fall into a trap.
He's trying to lead Trump to these more helpful places. Trump will not go.
Right.
Trump's that's because the Democrats cheated. You're like, okay. So there's a lot of that.
Fox News thing. They would try to you could watch them coaching him through the interview.
Yep. But Trump tends not to rant and rave like he does at rallies or during TV interviews, especially somewhat hostile TV interviews. He is still an incoherent, crazy person, but more subdued. Subdued.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, I noticed in a couple of these, he doesn't totally fit with the vibe. The Theo Von cocaine comment is a good example. It's like he's a little too old.
Yes.
He's better and he's done some things with golf.
It is
like
funny to hear
very
him
popular,
keep bringing
sort
up
of
golf
influencers.
Yes.
And those, he seems like a natural fit because he is a good golfer. And the UFC stuff because he's been going to fights for a long time.
With his boy Kid Rock.
With his boy Kid Rock, and he likes Dana White, right? So that is a little bit better with it. But some of the younger comedians like Theo Von, he doesn't seem like it's as much of a cultural fit as you might assume.
He's very Abe Simpson, sitting down and talking with them.
Yeah.
So did you enjoy it? Was it fun?
No, I didn't enjoy it at all. No, I thought it was terrible. I mean, honestly, the only thing left to enjoy about Trump is when he says something truly
unhinged.
Crazy and unhinged that we haven't heard
right.
before, but 9 years in, it's getting kind of old. And so, when he is challenged, that's fun to watch.
Right.
When he's just like rambling on, I don't know. I couldn't pick up anything interesting.
So when I started listening to the Theo Von thing, my first take was it's just boring. Like, I'm really bored with it. Like, the rallies are terrifying, but at least there's like interesting stuff popping off. There's some like a fireworks show. And I was like, boy, he really doesn't have it like this. I don't think this is a big deal. And the more I started listening to it, the more I actually started to think back to the first conversation you and I ever had about podcasting, and about how part of the power of it is that it really makes you feel like you have a connection with the person that you're listening to. And the way that it's like, especially the long conversation between two people, you know, you get that sense of, it's like the back and forth feels very natural and conversational. And there's even like the way you talk on podcasts, like the Terry Gross, like softer voice, lean into the microphone. And like Trump was talking with the very soft voice. Like, you get to the end of it and you feel like you've had an intimate hour with this person that makes you feel like you have more of a connection with them. And it's humanizing. And to be clear, I did not feel like I had a personal connection with Donald J. Trump. That's not what I'm saying. But if the Trump in your mind is the like scary fire breathing guy from rallies, and you're just like a 18, 17, 22-year-old, whatever, guy who's like not that into politics, listen to these podcasts because you like UFC, and it's like, I'm not sure if I'm in with all the like wild Trump stuff. And then you hear like, oh, he's just a guy who talks about UFC and golf. He's not that scary. The Democrats say that he's terrifying, but like, I don't know, he seems chill and he talks about his brother. I think that really like makes him a little fuzzier and softer and creates maybe a little bit of a permission structure.
Well, and I think what's notable there is that a lot of those folks have not watched the rallies.
Right.
And they have not followed Trump in the news like we have followed Trump in the news over the last 9 years, because
Trump.
a lot of them were too young. And so especially if your first interaction with Trump is listening to these podcasts, and then your only other exposure is hearing liberals and people in the media being like, he's a threat to democracy, he's gonna, and then you listen to him, you're like, oh, maybe they're just hysterical.
And there's also a lot about, you know, I know we're going to talk about like, will the podcasters endorse him? Are they, what are the, like, how will they weigh in politically? But just like hearing someone have a friendly conversation with an hour with someone is like, socially, it's an endorsement. Like, not in the sense that like they came out and say, I endorse his entire political profile, whatever, but it just, the way that our brains work, we say that as like, someone I trust and likes this person, therefore I trust and like that person. I think it brings him into the circle.
Right. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, but like a Taylor Swift endorsement, or even not a Taylor Swift endorsement, but a Taylor Swift just like talking about Kamala Harris.
Yes, stand
Suddenly
on a stage.
You've got a bunch of Taylor Swift fans who aren't politically engaged, who are like, well, maybe if it's not an endorsement, like she seems to like her, so that's cool. You know?
Honestly, are these podcasts, are they the Taylor Swifties of the right?
You know,
I kind of think they might be. It's just like
be
a pop culture phenomenon. It's vaguely political, but kind of not.
So Dan Pfeiffer actually beat us to the punch on this conversation this week.
He did. He's hacking into our Slack again.
You know,
getting all the notes.
It sounds, when Crooked Media puts out content that's similar, it sounds like we planned it. We didn't plan it.
You mean collusion?
Our brains are all just broken by the internet in the same way.
Unfortunately, that's true.
And so, Dan and I frequently tweet things at the same time that are similar.
Really? That's
sure
funny.
enough, he did this message box.
Quote unquote Dan.
Dan, yeah, right. It's called How and Why Trump is Targeting Gen Z Men, in which he highlights the absolutely massive gender gap between Gen Z men and women. I'll just put some statistics behind this. So the latest Time Siena polls in the 6 swing states that have Kamala slightly ahead show a giant gender gap, especially among young voters, more so among young voters than older generations. She's up by 38 points with women between 18 to 29, but Trump is up by 13 points among young men. Among young men, the Democratic advantage in partisan identification, which is more stable than what happens from election to election, it fell from 9 points in 2012 when Obama ran for re-election to just 5 points in 2023.
For under 30s?
For under 30s. Okay. Democratic advantage, yeah. And what's interesting to know about this group of voters, this group of young men, a majority in this group still supports abortion rights, same-sex marriage. They are not necessarily socially conservative, but almost half of them say that there is some or a lot of discrimination against men in American society, more than older age groups say that, and up from a third who said that just in 2019.
Really?
Yeah,
Among
and now
young
there's
men?
a half. Yeah.
Huh.
I know. And these are a lot of, I mean, that's, at least a bunch of Democratic men in that group. Again, support same-sex marriage, support abortion rights.
Yeah.
So it's not the social conservative stuff that's getting them.
Right.
It is more of this
It's not
cultural
the border,
vibes kind of thing. So what do you make of that? What do you make of this gender gap?
So I note on the Times Siena poll and the gender gap there, what it found is that Gen Z men support Trump at actually comparable rates to millennial men and to boomer men. The reason for the gap is that Gen Z women are so much more supportive of Kamala than women in other generations. So there is an unusually wide gender gap among Gen Z, but it's mostly from women being much more pro Kamala than men being pro MAGA. But the lead that Kamala has among under 30s is just plus 16, which is down from plus 24 that Biden had in 2022. So it's definitely a problem. I think my read, and you kind of hinted at this, is I think that it is a gender polarization problem first and an internet problem second, just a gender polarization thing that's getting routed through the internet. There's this theory by a guy named Michael Kimmel called aggrieved entitlement. Have you heard this theory?
No.
So it says that the backlash among young men is this sense that the world is less and less favorable to young men, but where that comes from is just there is inching steps towards progress in society for women and for people of color. And so the way that a lot of young men experience that is that they thought they were going to be as entitled as the generation before them as young men, and they feel that they have less of a special place than they used to, and that feels like something is being taken away. And that's something that you hear in Gamergate 10 years ago. It's something you hear 20 years ago. It's kind of a persistent thing, but it becomes more and more pronounced as gender and racial equality makes its baby steps towards a better direction. And this is especially pronounced among non-college people without college diplomas, which shows up a lot in the gender polarization data. And then I think a lot of it is social isolation, which may play a role in why it's so much higher among young men, where the rate of men who do not have close friends is way, way up. Mm-hmm. Who have zero close friends is up from 2 to 10% among college graduates, and among non-college graduates is up from 3% to 24%. It's people who say they have no close friends. And I think that sends people into bad podcasts, the internet, when you don't have a kind of community to anchor yourself. And then what you do is you go look for answers to say, why do I have this feeling of aggrieved entitlement? Why do I feel like my special status is being taken away by society?
And someone will have answers for you.
Right. Someone will have answers. We know that the algorithm will provide a set of answers that is going to be the most polarizing, the most outrage-inducing, the most kind of radicalizing, and then communities form on the internet or among podcasts around those answers that say it's the feminists, it's video game companies, whatever it is, and that now your entire sense of self is built around the answer that your community on the internet gave you for why you feel like something's being taken away. And I think that a big part of the increase in that on under 30s is just the pandemic. I think a lot of people spent 2 or 3 years indoors finding community on the internet when it's mediated through algorithms that were pushing them towards the worst possible answers for the problems they felt they were facing.
I also think that there is a difference between hearing that there is a pay gap between men and women, mm-hmm. and that women should get paid just like men do, mm-hmm. that that women should have the right to choose, that there has been historic discrimination against women in the mm-hmm. workforce, that there has been sexual harassment and assault that women have had to deal with. Right? There's a difference between that and then young men being told that they are to blame for things.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And so
mm-hmm.
it's the what is wrong with men?
Yeah.
kind of discourse
right.
that was, probably peaked in 2017, 2018, 2019.
Sure.
But I do think, and I think young women now are doing better in school, tending
mm-hmm.
to achieve more. And economically, you hear a lot of these young men say that they, you used to be able to raise a family with a college degree, and now you can't.
Right.
And so they feel like their place
mm-hmm.
in the world, not just culturally, but economically.
Right.
And they're still raised with the traditional notion of family and masculinity. So they're like, okay, I'm supposed to support the family, but I can't. Mm-hmm. And what does that tell me about who I am and stuff like that? And that leads them, I think, into these spaces.
And there's it sounds very silly to peg a lot of it to anti-woke comedians, but these podcasts have huge, I mean, truly staggering audiences, and a lot of what they have on are comedians that are anti-woke. And the thing that those people always complain about and always talk about is like, you used to be able to make this joke or that joke, or you used to be able to make like race jokes or make jokes about women, and now you're not allowed to do that anymore. And we are not, quote unquote, we are not allowed to talk the way that we want to talk, or that we talk amongst each other, because society's become hostile to us.
Right.
And I think that really gets internalized.
And look, and again, it's a big, diverse bunch here.
Sure.
So
No,
there
of course,
are
it's
some
not
who are
all-
much
yeah.
more like,
Yeah.
oh, these wokesters, and you know, all they can do is make trans jokes, you know, and it's
Right.
like really just fucking lame.
Yeah.
And then there's people who we used to be able to make these kind of jokes, instead of complaining about that, just make those kind of jokes.
Yes. Oh,
that
for
are
sure.
much more like borderline still,
Right.
that are
Edgy,
more reflective of how
yes.
people might talk in private.
Right.
And I think that is attractive to a lot of these young men who are
That's
like,
true.
oh, these conversations I have with my friends,
Right.
if I had them publicly anymore, I'd get in trouble. Right?
Well,
So
it's
that kind of-
it's not for nothing that a lot of these audiences are 14, 15-year-old boys. Like 14,
Yep.
15-year-old boys have terrible impulses. Like,
Yep.
I used to be one. Like,
Me
we
too.
should not be allowed to say things publicly or on the internet.
Right.
But 14, 15-year-old boys go on to Reddit, and they're making jokes that are, you know, I think we could say bad and offensive.
Yep.
And then that's like, there's a backlash to that. And then the backlash, like reacting against the backlash becomes your identity. And it feels silly to say that like vast political movements in the country are happening because of people not feeling like they're allowed to make jokes that they used to be able to make. But it does get internalized as a sense that like society is threatening to me, and society is trying to control me as a white man, and the things that I just want to say to my bros, and we're like hanging out, and you know that's why it feels to these people like the feminists or whatever are coming for us, and that we have to push back against them so we can be real Americans, which is, you know, not good. But
well, and again, what everyone wants is community and to be included and to feel like they belong.
Yes.
Right? And so that doesn't mean that we accept like hateful, misogynistic views, right? But it does mean that as we are trying to like build either a political coalition or a larger American community, you want to sort of invite people in and not make people feel like they should not be part of X community because of their
Sure.
identity, regardless of what their
Right.
identity is.
Well, Bernie Sanders went on the Theo Von podcast, and
Yep.
he was just Bernie Sanders, and it was great. And they just had a nice conversation, and, you know, it was lovely.
Well, and this is why I think it's also useful for Democrats to go on these and to talk to them, because
Sure.
I watched a clip of Bernie talking to Theo Von, and Theo Von's like complaining about drug companies and how they, you know, charge too much money for prescription, blah, blah, and he's like, well, why don't we know about which politicians are part of this and that are helping out the drug companies? And you can see, and Bernie, instead
So
of like
funny.
laughing or being angry, which we might have done, right?
Sure.
Like people-
Yeah,
was
or he does
very
from time to time.
Yeah, he does from time to time. Was very calmly explaining, like, well, here's the deal. You know, there was this, the Inflation Reduction Act,
Right.
and there, you know,
Right.
the Republicans voted against it, and it's just so there is some education to be done there too,
Right.
And you know, there is this tendency to be like, oh, if you go on that person's program, you're platforming that person and it's
Endorsing,
bag, and
yeah,
there's guilt by
right.
association kind of stuff.
Right.
But if it just from a strategic standpoint, from the Democratic political strategic standpoint,
Right.
like there is an audience of people there who could be our voters and who we need,
Yeah.
because their views on a lot of issues align with us.
Right.
That if we could go on and reach those people, not by like telling inappropriate jokes or laughing at them when they happen,
Oh, of
but just
course,
by
yeah.
explaining our position in like a calm, rational way, you know, you pick up some votes there.
Well, and, you know, 15-year-old boys do not have the most acutely defined political views.
Yeah.
It's like
Also, they
very-
don't vote, so.
They don't, but they grow up and vote.
Right.
Well, or some of them do.
Yes.
And if what I think a lot of what is happening is it's a 15-year-old boy who has like a fuzzy sense that like the system is rigged, or it seems the status quo seems unfair, and the only people who are speaking to that are the Joe Rogans and doing the Peter Thiels come on and like the vaguely right-coded stuff. But Democrats have answers to that. Democrats have answers to why the system might feel like it's unfair. Bernie Sanders has a lot of answers to that, and extending those when people are still young enough to be in a place of like, well, I have this fuzzy sense that the world is not fair, but I don't have a specific hardened answer for why that is. It's a good time to get in there.
Yeah. So I think it's a smart strategy for Donald Trump to
It
do
is.
this.
Yeah.
It was funny. Max Reed and his Substack, he was talking about why Trump seemed to fit with these podcasters. And he says he is himself manifestly the same kind of dramatic, gossipy, maldeveloped, attention-seeking nuisance as the creators who populate the greater dipshit media economy.
Dipshit media economy is good. Yeah.
It's very good.
And the thing is, I think a lot of them would embrace that. I think it's kind of the like, we're just the bros.
Yeah, we are
here.
dipshits.
Yeah.
We're dipshits.
I've got my moments of dipshittery, I'll be honest. It's happened.
Not me. Never been a dipshit.
That's true.
All right. In other right-wing internet personality news, this week the Justice Department unsealed an indictment that alleges Tenet Media, the so-called supergroup that includes MAGA favorites Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, and Benny Johnson, was being funded by Russian operatives as part of a Kremlin-orchestrated campaign to influence the outcome of the 2024 election. The indictment accuses 2 employees of RT, the Kremlin's media arm, of funneling nearly $10 million to Tenet, and states that the goal of the operation was to fuel pro-Russian narratives and push content favorable to Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump. Surely this must be a resistance lib fever dream, right?
It's hard to imagine how it could be more blue MAGA. Yeah.
Well, here's an example of what we're talking about from Tim Pool.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
I wouldn't say that's very subtle.
You think so? Something that is so fun. So the YouTube clip of this has this very funny thing where the image is just him zooming in and out on a Google map of Ukraine the whole time.
Because I'm sure he was an expert before this.
Ukraine.
Just as a reminder, everyone, Vladimir Putin did invade Ukraine.
I did hear about that. Yeah, I don't think we owe him an apology.
War crimes all over the place.
Actually.
I don't know.
I don't think Ukraine's our enemy.
He is a brutal dictator in his own country, and now has, decided he wants to bulldoze Ukraine. So there you go.
Are you saying all this to prove that Putin is not funding us?
Oh no!
Are you trying to?
Notice I'm not saying anything
it.
about the CCP. Are we living in 2016 again? What's going on?
So it is a real marker of how things have changed since 2016. That instead of hiring out an elaborate hacking and influence campaign, they just shoveled money to America's dumbest YouTubers. Like they really learned some lessons about our media environment and how easy it is to exploit. It's just like write a check to Tim Pool. You don't have to hire all the hackers. You don't have to do the fake news and the hacking.
Just prop them up.
Just prop him up. Although then in defense of Russia's shitty plan here, the guy who led the 2016, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was blown up in an airplane after leading a failed insurrection. So they're working with some blunter tools here. Sometimes you take a hit on the team.
So far, Tim Pool and Dave Rubin have both strongly denied any knowledge of the Kremlin-backed funds.
Oh, well, if they strongly denied.
Stating that they were deceived by the Russian government. I also saw this morning that Tim Pool is cooperating with the DOJ.
Yeah, I bet he is.
Do you buy that they knew? Do you think the Kremlin was relaying talking points to them? Mm-hmm. Or did they just want to prop up voices who were already aligned with them?
So the indictment says that the 2 founders of the company, who are big social media personalities themselves, did know that it was Russia.
Yes.
And that the indictment also conspicuously does not name them, which is strongly suggestive that they are cooperating. And there were a number of conversations where Tim Pool and Dave Rubin were asking hey, where's all this money coming from? Because it sure is a lot of money.
This is the best.
So the answer was that from the 2 founders who knew that it was Russian money from the Kremlin, they said that it came from a fictitious Belgian investor named Eduardo Gregorian. That's 2 N's at the end.
He's just a free speech enthusiast. And that was it. They were like, okay, case closed.
Gregorian's name was misspelled on many of the documents, and Tim Pool and Dave Rubin did look for evidence that he was a real person and did not find any, and they said, well, that's good enough for us.
That's good enough for us. Quick Google search turns up nothing, which usually happens.
My $400,000 check, please. I mean, look.
$400,000 a month for 16 videos.
Mm-hmm. In some cases, $100,000 a video.
$100,000 video, and some of these videes were getting 1,000 views per episode on YouTube.
I know.
These videos
remarkably failed.
With the way that YouTube monetization works, $100, a couple $100 generously with what they would make.
So there were at least a couple of instances where the Russian agents directly relayed talking points to them. There was they ordered them to produce a video blaming Ukraine and the United States for a mass shooting at a Moscow music venue, and the response from the company's founder was, "We are happy to do that," which is great. Good stuff. The two Russian agents were also in the team Discord, although under fake names.
That's funny.
There was one of my favorite details from the indictment is that the one of the Russian agents was getting really frustrated that the people they were paying weren't doing enough to promote the network.
I was just
okay.
about to read
take it. Do it.
It's so funny. This is in the Washington Post story. It says, even after recruiting their talent, though, the Russians purportedly running Tenet were frustrated with Tenet's lack of success. Best line in the story. Like many media executives,
I love it.
They worried that their employees were doing more to promote their personal social media brands than their new outlet. In February of 2024, Elena Afanasьeva, one of the indicted RT employees, allegedly complained under an alias in a Tenet chat room that the influencers she had hired weren't boosting Tenet enough. I know this is not an obligation, but we are falling behind with numbers.
But wait, the best part is when they wouldn't listen to her, they just took her money. So she started a second alias to pretend to be another manager. And it was like, well, I'm hearing it from two managers, which frankly, brilliant management strategy. That's when we start to hear from Jon Favreau, but spelled Favroo, who just happened to vote with you on everything.
There's been some great tweets about this. Someone said, how do you live down finding out you were an actual, real-life, useful idiot? You have to go the rest of your life knowing another country sat down and had meetings about how stupid you are. Mm-hmm. They all got around a table and voted and said, yeah, he's fucking dumb. Let's use him.
They were right.
They were right.
Honestly, someone could call me dumb if they were going to give me that amount of money. I wouldn't take it from Russia. But if the trade-off was they are going to call me stupid, but they're going to pay me to say something I was already going to say, I would consider that.
All right, can we assess the effectiveness of this particular...
It's one of the funniest parts of it.
...influence operation?
Complete, utter failure.
Yeah.
At one point, the indictment really plays up the fact that they got 16 million views across 2,000 YouTube videos. That's 8,000 views in a video. That's nothing.
Yeah.
It's zero.
I was trying to, then Jeremiah Johnson in Infinite Scroll, great Substack, makes the case that, it does have an effect sort of subtly, right? Which is like this very large network of right-wing influencers, the same sort of, false talking points about misinformation about the war in Ukraine, about Russia, sort of just like make their way through this ecosystem.
Sure.
And, if the Russians are spending money to amplify it, on the margins, when then you get members of Congress who... delayed for a long, long time.
Yeah.
It's the funding for Ukraine, even when some Republicans had initially been like, sure,
right,
we'll fund Ukraine because that's important.
There's more to back.
And then they suddenly turn around one day and half the Republican caucus is no longer in favor of Ukraine because they believe a bunch of false narratives that were spun up on some of these very podcasts and YouTube shows. It's very chicken or egg, where did it start? But it can have an effect on the margin.
It actually made me think a lot about reporting that I did a few years ago on the influence of Saudi and Emirati funding in DC think tanks, which is, of course, one difference is that that's not secret. It's out in the open, but otherwise it's pretty similar.
Right.
And a point that a lot of people made to me is they were like, look, no one who's getting hired by these Saudi-funded think tanks is saying things that they would not otherwise say or don't otherwise believe. But part of what happens is that when you spend years getting paid by whoever it is that's paying you, and they want to hear certain things, and they know they're going to reward certain things, you just lean into those. Maybe you already believed it, but maybe you just say it a lot more, you lean into it a lot more.
And when you're well-funded, you tend to have bigger and bigger platforms.
Exactly.
Or at least you have the opportunity.
Right. That those people are getting resources that are not going to other people, and that it's just the Saudi-funded people are the ones who have all the platforms in DC foreign policy circles. Those are the ones who get invited to all the panels because they have that money. A lot of that money goes towards funding other programs, and so it just perpetuates their views much more widely. Tim Pool was going to say the crazy shit he was going to say anyway, but the fact that he now has a ton more money to plow into his media company is bad.
Also, you can imagine if the CIA or Defense Department was looking at Russia and saw some media properties and media outlets and media personalities who were Vladimir Putin actually sucks. Now, it'd be a little tough in that country because he'd shut them down.
Right.
But you could see us being we'll fund those pro pro-Western, pro-USA voices.
Sure,
and
that happened for a long time. I mean, the Open Society used to fund it. They used to fund Navalny. They funded all these other people who were genuine dissidents who really believed what they were fighting for. But yeah, the foreign money helps.
Yeah. All right. In other news, Twitter is officially dead in Brazil. On Monday, Brazil's Supreme Court upheld a decision to ban Twitter nationwide after Elon Musk and his social network refused to comply with orders from the nation's top judge to suspend specific accounts over misinformation concerns. Musk has, of course, taken the ban well, taking to Twitter to call the judge a dictator and claim he's, quote, destroying free speech for political purposes.
And threatened to basically get him sent to prison.
Yeah. Yeah,
which
he's
is
not
cool.
happy.
Which is a cool thing to do to a Supreme Court justice.
Can you give a little bit of history on how this ban came to be, how we got here?
Okay, so last year, Brazil had basically their version of January 6th. It was actually on January 8th, so they got pretty close.
Yeah.
Where Jair Bolsonaro, who is the far-right president, lost election. A bunch of his supporters tried to storm a bunch of government offices to overturn the election. Didn't work. As part of the investigation after the fact, the Supreme Court, which is involved in the investigation, has been looking into Twitter accounts that were spreading election disinformation to spin up the violence on January 8th. And as part of that, they asked Twitter to suspend some number of accounts that were under investigation for posting things that were illegal, basically illegal incitement. And they did that last year. It was fine. Twitter suspended the accounts. It was no big deal. Again, they asked this year some more accounts. These are pro-Bolsonaro accounts. Bolsonaro is Trump's guy, so he's Elon Musk's guy. Twitter refused to comply. And then the escalation that led to this is Twitter then withdrew all of its staff from Brazil. And the reason that they did that is that way the Brazilian government has no way to enforce regulations against Twitter.
And they're saying that they thought the Brazilian government and this judge would arrest potentially some of the Twitter employees in Brazil.
I don't think there's evidence for that. It's the thing that Twitter said that's in other countries that has happened. But the reason that Brazilian law requires that Twitter maintains an office in Brazil is so that they have a way to regulate the company because there's an office to receive fines, to receive regulatory rulings. They just need to have a legal representative there. Otherwise, they are completely above the law. So Elon Musk withdrew their staff so that they could basically say, we're going to post whatever we want, we're going to allow whatever accounts we want, and you're going to have no way to enforce against us. And that was where the Brazilian Supreme Court, after several months of this, said, if you're really not going to reinstate your office, we're going to block the platform to compel you to reinstate it.
So we're usually quick to assume that Elon Musk is in the wrong on most of these issues, because most often he is. But the Washington Post published an op-ed about this titled, "In This Free Speech Fight, Musk's X has marked the right position." What a headline. That's okay.
That's so clever.
Yeah, so clever. In which they argue, as the title states, that despite Musk's typical inflammatory and often inconsistent approach to free speech, this time he actually has a point.
What do you think? Because I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah, I mean, the key graph in the Washington Post editorial is, if this sounds authoritarian, it is. Whatever the threat to democracy that the accounts Mr. Marias wanted gone might have posed, the threat from one government official limiting the speech of 220 million people is greater, and the entire episode is turning into a cautionary tale for democracies that believe the answer to troublesome online expression is to suppress it. I will say that the op-ed made me think of how much, I mean, this is a different country's political system, but how much power do you want to vest in one judge to decide what should be taken down and what should not? What is legitimately potentially inciting violence, like the kind we saw on January 6th here and January 8th there, or undermining democracy, and what is just speech? And where, I mean, we've talked about content moderation a million times, but where does this, this is sort of we just talked last week about the case here where all these right-wing goons suggested that the government leaned on Twitter and other social media companies to take down COVID disinformation, but also to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story, which is all bullshit.
Yeah.
But this would be an example of the government actually ordering a social media company to take down content that they do not like.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two issues here. I think one is what you're raising about, do we think that it's good for the Brazilian Supreme Court to have the ability to order Twitter to suspend certain accounts. And to be clear, it wasn't just like a judge like going through and being like, I don't like this tweet, I don't like this tweet. It was because those accounts are under investigation for breaking the law, for inciting an insurrection. But I do take your point. Yeah. And I think this is a hard one because there's no perfect actor to regulate social media. It's like it's either governments or it's the companies. I sure don't trust the companies to do it.
Yep.
There are a lot of governments I don't trust to do it. Donald Trump comes back into office, I don't trust him to do it.
Right. That was my first thought.
Right.
You know, like imagine if like Donald Trump and Clarence Thomas, right? Just the two of them were deciding what speech online should be censored or taken down, and what should be allowed. We wouldn't want that.
In this case, the Brazilian Supreme Court did ultimately vote unanimously to back up the decision. But I do, at some point, someone has to decide, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to have anyone deciding this, but I think we all agree that we're at a point where social media is so impactful and can be so potentially dangerous that someone has to do it.
Yeah.
And it seems like in most cases, in democratic countries, the government is the least bad answer. But I think the bigger issue here is that what Elon Musk is trying to do by taking his offices out of the country, and the reason that Brazil blocked Twitter is because this was a move explicitly designed to put Twitter above the law in Brazil. The explicit reason he did this is so the government would have no power over it whatsoever, regardless of whether you like the decision, what the decision is. And I don't think that we can have social media companies operating above the law by using this cheat of completely offshoring from countries. And like I reported a few years ago in Sri Lanka, where there was like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube were spinning up all of this racial violence and this religious violence. And the government kept trying to contact the social media companies and saying, we want to do something, anything, just work with you to get incitement and hate speech off of the platform before it gets more people killed. And of course, Facebook ignored all the phone calls until they shut down access to the platform. The other thing that really, like, I just am not sympathetic to Twitter or Silicon Valley generally on this question of like, you can't let governments ban us because it's free speech. You know who fucking loves the ban button? Facebook. They blocked access for news, and we've talked about this many times because it makes me so mad, blocked access for news in Australia and then in Canada because they didn't like regulations passed by the government. So the real fight here, I think, is whether Silicon Valley is going to let governments get away with regulating them in any context whatsoever. And Elon Musk put the government in this position to say your only lever left is going to be to ban the platform to try to force me to bring offices back in the country so you can have what they actually want to do, which is not to ban the entire platform, but just to regulate, like, hey, maybe don't incite insurrections on it.
Well, and also a government has the ability to look at a foreign company that is operating media within their borders and to try to regulate or expel them altogether, which is what we just did here with TikTok. I mean, it is a similar...
Or Russia Today.
Right? And so, you have to weigh those concerns. The other important thing to point out here is that under Elon Musk, Twitter had given into 83%, according to one analysis, of requests from authoritarian governments to remove content.
Oh, yeah.
So when authoritarian governments ask Musk to take down certain content, he complies. But when it is a left-leaning government in Brazil,
that's true.
Not so much.
Yes, I think that it's the political affinity with this Trump ally, and I think it's also the fact that authoritarian governments have been much looser with the block button in the past, like especially countries like Turkey and India, and democracies have not been. And I think that, honestly, I think it's important for Brazil to show that democracies will do it too, so that we don't have to get to this point.
Brazil is one of Twitter's largest markets.
40 million users.
Do you think it's going to have a big effect on Twitter struggling business, or do you think they're going to resolve this?
That business is doing great. They're doing fine. They're doing so well.
$24 billion he lost investors.
It's
I
wild.
just saw.
I know. Could you imagine being an investor in Twitter? I mean, I hate to say that you had it coming, but come on, what kind of decision was that?
$24 billion. This is the guy we're putting in charge of the Trump administration's government audit. If Trump wins again.
He's going to do great. He's a brilliant businessman. No, it's not a total disaster. Brazil is a huge market, but Twitter has been declining there for a long time. Like people they use video platforms.
They use WhatsApp a lot.
They use WhatsApp a lot. There's like a Chinese platform, Kwai, that I'd never even heard of that is bigger than Twitter now.
About it now.
The real thing that is really going to have you heard about this European Union, the DSA, Digital Services Act thing?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Like the European Union is now telling Twitter, you're in violation of our social media regulations. It was just a couple weeks ago in this letter. And a senior MEP, which is a member of the European Parliament, said that the EU, all of Europe, could block access to Twitter if he doesn't resolve it. That's the really big one. That's death spiral.
Yeah, that's bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Elon Musk is going to take it well.
It's good.
I don't think it's going to improve the experience on the platform. All right, finally, on Wednesday morning, Haley Welch, the internet personality better known as the Hawk Tuah girl, dropped a video announcing her exciting new project. Austin, can we play the video?
I'm Haley Welch. A little while ago, my life took a complete left turn and it changed forever. And along the way, I've realized that everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Well, now it's my time to talk. And Pookie.
Who is Pookie? Who is Pookie?
You may stop by too. Check out my podcast every week, Talk to Them, where I'm sitting down with the coolest guests and having actual conversations with them. New episodes every week. Subscribe to that thing.
You heard that right, folks. Hawk Tuah is joining the glamorous world of podcasting. The show, brilliantly titled
That's funny.
Talk Tuah.
Talk Tuah is funny. Come on.
Is set to debut this week and will be part of Jake Paul's Better Content Network. We've come full circle, folks.
Yeah, really.
Max, for the folks who may not be familiar with Hawk Tuah, can you please explain Welch's meteoric rise and tell us why she is referred to as Hawk Tuah? You are unfortunately not allowed to leave out any details.
So I could not possibly do as great a job summarizing this as the Google auto-generated info box that you get when you Google. Did you see this?
No.
It says this is like actually a thing that pops up on Google if you search on your phone, and it says, quote, known for onomatopoeia catchphrase during interview. I'm never going to top that. Okay, so 2 months ago, which feels like 1,000 years ago, there was a man on the street interview with these YouTube's accounts where they go out and talk to people when they're like going out to nightclubs or whatever and just ask them provocative questions. And someone asked her, what's one move in bed that makes a man grow crazy every time? Which is not a question we ask a lot on this show. And her answer was, you got to give him that Hawk Tuah and spit on that thing, as in lubricate that thing. And I'm not going to explain what that thing is. If you don't know at this point, you don't want to hear it from me.
Now, if you haven't figured out already, Hawk Tuah is the sound that you make when you're about to spit. Right.
That's right.
And she really nailed the sound.
She was funny, she's animated. You can see why she went viral, but then it became this thing that happens on TikTok where it's getting remixed and people are commenting on it and kind of like eats its own tail.
She did interviews everywhere. I think there was rumors she was going to like sign with UTA, it's a big talent agency, and
she was in Kamala's Veep-stakes running for a while. Yeah, it's kind of a dark horse candidate. And I got to tell you, her numbers in Pennsylvania, they're good.
There were rumors when they thought that Beyonce was going to show up.
That's right, that it was Hawk Tuah girl.
That was Hawk Tuah girl.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so why are we talking about this?
It's a great question.
Ryan Broderick had a great piece in his newsletter Garbage Day this week about how the internet has made it harder to gauge what's actually popular, and that Welch is probably the most egregious example of this phenomenon. What did you think of that piece? Is there actually an audience for this show, or is this just some weird viral thing that sort of like went out of control and now people are trying to make it popular offline?
So initially that I was like, it's one of those two, and I was kind of thinking about it, and I was thinking a lot about how like, you know, well, there's this thing now where people keep trying to create a pipeline of like viral moment to like real world merch or like books. Like there was the drill book. Do you remember the Shit My Dad Says book?
No.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Okay.
This is a viral Twitter account from like the early 2010s where someone quoted like her dad would say funny stuff, and they turned it into a book that sold 8 copies. I mean, people have been trying forever to turn like, how do you make more money off of these viral moments? And I think you look at the fact that there's all this merch and she's getting a podcast and everything, and it's like, is that happening now? And I think actually just what's happening now is I think that this is just very specifically the like online gambling industrial complex, because the actual places where she's making her money are not anything that is suggestive of her having a real audience. It's hawking crypto and going to crypto conferences, which will pay literally anybody to show up and hawk some sort of coin because it's just a form of gambling.
Hawk.
That's right. Yes, which is part of why they love her, I'm sure. And the quote unquote podcast that she's getting is on Better, which is a sports gambling network, which is just gambling. It's just straight up chance gambling. And I think this is just like people trying to generate advertising for gambling websites, basically by saying, boy, they got the Hawk Tuah girl. Maybe that's the sports gambling website that I should go to. That's my take.
It's also a bit of a talent pipeline, and it's like an opportunity to prove yourself, right?
That's true.
Because it's like, oh, why did she go viral? Oh, there's an attractive young woman who was talking about sex.
Everybody knows about her right now.
She's talking about sex, and it
sells, I hear.
Yeah, right. And so they're like, why not this person become famous.
Mm-hmm.
Other people have become famous for less.
That's true. I guess it's always possible that she could like catch a second time and actually generate an audience. And if she does, God bless. Although please don't do it on a sports gambling network, because sports gambling is immoral and it's wrong. And I don't think that you should support it with your newfound celebrity, Hawk Tuah girl.
Wow. Okay. I mean, we have to have a debate about sports gambling on this podcast.
Or are you?
This is not very helping. This is not going to help with the manosphere very much.
Yeah, that's true. They're all funded by.
They're
you know
all
what?
funded
That's
by
probably
sports,
part of it. Is that fucking we legalize sports gambling?
Yeah.
You know what? I blame the state legislatures for the manosphere pod. I do. I'm serious. That's who's funding these guys.
This sounds like a special Wad 6.
It has been and will continue to be. Yes.
Broderick says, though, in the piece, the conclusion I've come to this summer, one I'm not totally sure I fully believe yet, is that what's really happening here is that virality is decoupling from popularity. And I think you could even argue that the very idea that mass appeal had to be accurately reflected back to us online and vice versa was an entirely millennial idea, which goes into a... I
mean, it's
I think that's interesting just because of all the silos now.
Sure.
That something that we assume is something went viral that will have this sort of mass popular appeal, which...
That is interesting. It's actually, as I'm thinking about it, a like contrast with 10 years ago is that when we would have online monoculture moments, it would just be because we all saw a video that was fun.
Yeah.
So the person or whatever was happening in that video could become actually popular on its own. And I think more often what happens now is that a moment like this becomes popular in the online monoculture, not because of the video itself, which is like you watch it for 8 seconds and then you're done, there's nothing else to do, is because of the remix culture introduced by TikTok.
Everyone's iterating on the
Everyone's
original
iterating on
video,
it, right.
yeah.
And it's like, we have some harsh words for TikTok, but I think it is genuinely cool what can happen on platforms like this when people create like new versions of it. They do new things with it. They like remix it in crazy ways that then you can turn an 8-second clip into like probably too many hours of content, but like new and interesting things. But that is to say that the thing that is actually drawing people in isn't the moment itself. It's the creativity around the moment, which is much harder to monetize unless you're TikTok.
Yeah. And I think that she will, like the first episode of that podcast, you know,
it's gonna get
people
some
are
listens.
gonna tune in.
What's she gonna say?
What's she gonna say? And then if it's not much, then that's it.
Yeah. But that's but that she hasn't lost anything.
That's
so
what I'm saying.
fine.
So it is the opportunity that it gives you, the virality gives you.
Yeah.
All right, that is our show for today. We will be back again here next week.
I'm going on vacation, so I'll be in Cape
Wow.
Cod. Yeah, that's right. I'll send you a postcard.
That's fun.